Hello, everyone. I'm really quite excited today because we're doing something very new. We are the new media sponsor for Leaders in Logistics. And I'm even happier that I'll be talking to my friend Miha from Bloq.it, who, in fact, I should say is the CEO of Bloq.it and co-founder, about something very close to my heart. Miha, what are we going to be talking about today?
Lockers. Is that correct?
Even better than lockers, we, I believe, are going to be talking about next generation lockers. And what we mean by next generation lockers is the ones that don't require stable power, 230, or if you're in the States, I think it's 110 volts, and are far more autonomous. So before I kick off, though, what I'll say is this is part of our coverage preparing for Leaders in Logistics, which will be in London, Twickenham Stadium on the 9th of October. Miha will be there, Bloq.it will be there, and we will be there. So without more ado, Miha, what do you think, other than what I've said so far, what differentiates a next-gen locker? And from your perspective, what are their advantages and disadvantages?
It's a good question. So, how we see the next gen locker is basically what we created with Next. So, maybe I could just describe a little bit how we got to that product and what does Next actually brings to the table. So, historically looking in the past years, we mainly knew two different types of locker products. There was a traditional electric locker with a power grid, and there was a battery locker that was very simple in its functionality. So while electric locker gave you all the functionality and internet connectivity, there was sometimes an issue with the deployments and looking for locations because it had to be obviously connected to electricity. Whereas you had the battery locker solutions that were consisting of 10 or 8 or 12 years of battery lifetime, but because of the energy consumption, they were in a very low functionality. So there was no connectivity, no screens, no interfaces directly on the locker. So we were not really satisfied with either of those solutions, especially with the simple battery one. So we wanted to make a mix, the best of both worlds, and we believe the next generation of lockers should offer that, and that's why we call our next gen locker just simply the Next. It's basically a locker that has a battery lifetime of at least a year. This was very important for us because we didn't want to interfere with the maintenance needs of a locker, because preventive maintenance in most cases happens once a year at least. So at the high usage, the locker should run on at least 1 year battery, easily swappable and rechargeable, also being cautious of the environment. But on the other hand, should retain all the functionalities.
I think that's a really good summary. So historically, we would either have the all singing, all dancing, big traditional machine that required not just power, but typically it had much more issues in terms of installing because it would have to have typically a base that'd be quite big, and they'd have everything, but expensive to implement, to put in place, requiring power, and therefore not suitable everywhere. On the other hand, you'd have a relatively basic and simple locker that was very, very easy to install anywhere and actually had a pretty long life, but you had very, very limited functionality in the machine. And I guess you tried to cut the Gordian knot by saying, okay, let's find the best of both worlds. And let's talk, Miha, a little bit more about this then. So I remember we were discussing one of your main clients that they wanted a lot of things that are actually quite difficult to have, printers being one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us what this next gen locker can offer in terms of peripherals.
Yeah. So when we're looking at what the market's going to look like in many years from now, so two things that I believe are for certain. One is that with a higher density, we need to be less picky with locations, right? So locker needs to be easy to deploy. That's one thing. So the battery locker powered off-grid locker here makes a lot of sense. So we like to say that our next gen locker actually doesn't compete necessarily with a traditional battery locker. Traditional battery locker had a very long duration of a battery, which we don't necessarily see as does it make sense after a certain period of time. So we wanted to basically build a battery powered locker that competes with a traditional electric locker. So the features that we offer are basically almost all the features that the customer would desire to enable a very good user experience or a very nice user flow. So the features that you can find is everything from video surveillance, screen, a printer label, and so on. So obviously the QR code and bar scanner, everything that is required to enable a very nice user flow experience. Also, if you take a look at where the future is going to go, it's the use cases on a locker will only expand. We cannot imagine that years from now there's going to be less use cases that are happening now. You can see C2C being very popular and popping up. There's, I believe, the lockers are just going to increase in their use cases, and we need to prepare our lockers who stay on the market for more than 10 years after we place them to be enabled and to be ready to adopt those use cases.
So basically what we're saying is that we can offer pretty much all of the peripherals that a traditional or conventional 230 volt powered machine could offer. And that's cool because I know one of the challenges sometimes with battery lockers is you can only use an app, which is okay for some people, but some people don't want to use an app. And it also, makes you dependent upon that capability or not. So I think that's pretty cool. But I have one last question, Miha. I think there are two schools of thought, and correct me if I'm wrong. One school of thought with the power supply is you try still to keep the locker to be as long lasting in terms of power supply, and you have maybe solar or other panels that seek to recharge the battery. And then you have, if I understand correctly, your option, which is that basically like in a racing car where you change the wheels, you just have a quick change of the battery after a year. What made you go for that option? And did I describe it correctly?
Yeah, I think you described it very well. So again, if you look at how the future is going to look like, we need to be ready for use cases, which is what I said before. And on the other hand, with a higher density of lockers, we cannot be too picky how location is going to look like. So what we wanted to build is a locker that's going to adapt to as many locations as possible. A battery needs to last at least for 1 year at a high usage because we don't want to interfere with the maintenance, preventive maintenance needs. On the other hand, if you implement other features such as solar panel, and I have nothing against solar energy at all. In this case, what we've seen is that solar panels actually limit you in picking the locations. A lot of so-called outdoor locations are actually not suitable to hold or to be dependent on a solar panel. You have countries in Europe that in wintertime don't really get a lot of sun. What happens in outdoor locations when the tree or the forest is close, or just the trees are around, and you limit actually the sun consumption of this solar panel? Or a lot of outdoor locations are considered to be gas stations, but as we know, gas stations are covered with the roof. We're placing over hundreds of lockers per week consistently. On this type of scale, it's very hard to know if the outdoor location is actually outdoor as you imagine it in your mind and is actually going to be suitable for solar panel. So our next gen locker is something that says, okay, in the future, with a lot of use cases, and with the future when we can't be too picky with locations, we need to be able to place this locker solution on scale.
Brilliant. Well, look, I think we've pretty much exhausted the topic, but if anybody is interested in discussing further, I'm sure they'll have a chance to talk to Miha or members of the Bloq.it team at Leaders in Logistics at Twickenham Stadium on the 9th of October. Of course, we'll be there as well. So if anyone is interested in showing me, the Last Mile Prophets, something unusual, interesting, and new, then grab me at the event. Miha, it's been really great talking, and looking forward to seeing you in Twickenham.
Likewise. See you there.